Do it for the grade.
Abraham Lincoln, when did you begin your presidency? I was elected in 1861, but I was so famous that I was re-elected in 1864 during the time of the Civil War. Mr. President, could you tell us about your early years? I was born February 12th, 1809 in Hodgenville, Kentucky. I was a lawyer and politician. I suspended the right of habeas corpus on April 27th, 1861. Abraham Lincoln, when did you die? On the night of April 14th, 1865, Mrs. Lincoln and I went to Ford's Theater in Washington. There, I was shot at point-blank range by that scallywag John Wilkes Booth.
Emancipation Proclamation. Decree announced by President Abraham Lincoln in September 1862 and formally issued on January 1st, 1863, freeing slaves in all Confederate states still in rebellion. Gettysburg Address. Speech made by Abraham Lincoln at a dedication ceremony for a cemetery for Union soldiers who died at the Battle of Gettysburg. In this November 19, 1863 speech, Lincoln stated that the freedom should exist in the United States for all men, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Thank you for your time, Abraham Lincoln.
Yep.
The Compromise of 1850 was the four-step compromise which admitted California as a free state, allowed the residents of the New Mexico and Utah territories to decide the slavery issue for themselves, ended the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and passed a new fugitive state slave law to enforce the constitutional provision. Oh, looks like they're doing it right now, stating that a slave escaping into a free state shall be delivered back to the owner.
The Kansas-Nebraska Act. Law passed in 1854 creating the Kansas and Nebraska territories, but leaving the question of slavery open to residents, thereby repelling the Missouri Compromise.
Bleeding Kansas was a series of violent political confrontations in the United States involving anti-slavery believers and people who were pro-slavery. It took place in the Kansas Territory between 1854 and 1861.
John Brown and his raid on Harper's Ferry. New England abolitionist John Brown's ill-fated attempt to free Virginia slaves with a raid on the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia in 1859. South Carolina secedes. On December 20th, 1860, a state convention in South Carolina, accompanied by all the hoopla and excitement of bands, fireworks displays, and huge rallies, voted unanimously to secede from the Union. In the weeks that followed, conventions in 6 other southern states, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, followed suit, with the support on average of 80% of their delegates. Morrill Land Grant Act. Law passed by Congress in July 1862 awarding proceeds from the sale of public lands to the states by the establishment of agricultural and mechanical colleges. Confederate States of America. The nation proclaimed in Montgomery, Alabama in February 1861, after the 7 states of the Lower South seceded from the United States. Crittenden Compromise, submitted by Senator John J. Crittenden of Kentucky in 1861. It called for several constitutional amendments which would guarantee the permanent existence of slavery in the slave states and would satisfy Southern demands on such issues of fugitive and slavery in the districts of Columbia.
We demand the existence of slaves.
This is Fort Sumter. President Lincoln sent the fort supplies on April 10th, 1861.
Here are the supplies.
On April 12th, 1861, as Lincoln's relief force neared Charleston Harbor, Brigard opened fire.
Pow! Pow! I surrender.
This concludes the beginning of the Civil War.
The Battle of Bull Run occurred when Union and Confederate armies clashed near Manassas Junction, Virginia. It was the first major land battle of the American Civil War. After fighting on the defensive for most of the day, the rebels rallied and were able to break the Union right flank, sending the Federals into a chaotic retreat towards Washington. The Battle of Antietam was fought on September 17, 1862, and was the first major battle in the Civil War to take place on Union soil. It's the bloodiest single-day battle in American history, with the number of dead, wounded, and missing at 22,717.
The Conscription Act was the act of getting recruits for military service using a draft in 1862.
You're going with me, boy.
The Union consisted of American men that entered the armed services in the United States of America.
Homestead Act. The law passed by Congress in May 1862 providing homesteads with 160 acres of free land in exchange for improving the land within 5 years of the grant.
The Battle of Monitor and Merrimack was a naval engagement at Hampton Roads, Virginia, a harbor at the mouth of the James River, notable as history's first duel between ironclad warships and the beginning of a new era of naval warfare.
Draft riots in New York City. In the spring of 1863, there were protests against the draft throughout the North. Riots and disturbances broke out in many cities, and several federal enrollment officers were killed. The greatest trouble occurred in New York City between July 13th and July 16th, 1863, where a wave of working-class looting, fighting, and lynching claimed the lives of 105 people, many of them African American.
Nathaniel Banks was placed in command of the Red River Campaign by General Halleck, which was an attempt to ascend this waterway using 10,000 troops and a fleet.
Sherman's march to the sea occurred when General William Tecumseh Sherman marched his army through Georgia in 1864. 18,000 slaves, entire families, people of all ages, flocked to the Union lines. By the war's end, nearly 1 million black people, fully a quarter of all the slaves in the South, had voted with their feet for the Union.
The Battle of Vicksburg was a major battle in which the North won, and because of this, Britain and France refused to accept the Confederacy as a country. This was also huge because the Union now controlled the Mississippi River. This and the Battle of Gettysburg were the two critical battles that decided the outcome of the war.
Edwin Stanton was an American lawyer and politician who served as Secretary of War under the Lincoln administration during the Civil War. Stanton's effective management helped organize the military resources of the North and guided the Union to victory. He also organized the manhunt for Lincoln's killer, John Wilkes Booth.
Robert E. Lee was offered command of the Union Army by President Lincoln. Lee hesitated, but finally decided to follow his native state, Virginia, into the Confederacy. In the spring of 1865, Lee and his remaining troops, outnumbered 2-1, still held Petersburg and Richmond.
The Battle of Gettysburg is the bloodiest and most crucial battle in the Civil War, with casualties in the North at 24,000 and the 28,000 in the South. This battle was decidedly the turning point in the war, as the South could no longer launch any attacks due to the loss of military men. This is the actual Battle of Gettysburg.
Andrew Johnson was the 17th president and was elected in 1865.
Why are you dressed
He deliberately
like that?
violated the Tenure of Office
Stop
Act,
it.
yet he escaped impeachment by just
Surrender
one
day.
vote.
The surrender of the Confederacy was in
So
Appomattox
white,
Courthouse,
boy.
Virginia, in a private home. Robert E. Lee showed in full dress uniform, whilst Ulysses S. Grant showed up wearing casual apparel.
Ulysses Grant was the 18th President of the United States from 1869 to 1877. In 1865, as Commanding General, Grant led the Union armies to victory over the Confederacy in the American Civil War.
Just
He then implemented
No.
Congressional Reconstruction.
no.
Congressional Reconstruction. Name given to the period 1867 through 1870 when the Republican-dominated Congress controlled Reconstruction-era policy. The Ku Klux Klan, perhaps the most prominent of vigilant groups that terrorized black people in the South during the Reconstruction era, founded by the Confederate veterans in 1866. And little kid failed.
Carpetbaggers were northern transplants to the South, many of whom were Union soldiers who stayed in the South after the war.
It's pretty nice here.
The Reconstruction Act was an 1877 act that divided the South into 5 military districts subject to martial law.
The 13th Amendment, created on July 28, 1865, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. 14th Amendment, created on July 28, 1868. All persons born or naturalized in the U.S. and subject to their jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the U.S. and of the state wherein they reside. 15th Amendment, created on March 30th, 1870. The right of citizens of the U.S. to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the U.S. or by any state on account of the race, color, or previous conditions of servitude.
The beginning of the Civil War was in 1861 when General B.G.T. Beauregard fired upon Fort Sumter and won. The end of the war was in 1865 where General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, in a private home.